Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our first guest. We have him for 2 hours tonight. First guest for the evening is Lee Spiegel. Lee has been interested in the idea of UFOs, alien, living dinosaurs, and the whole range of topics that often overlap the worlds of science and unexplained phenomena since he was a young boy. His first foray into the pursuit of the pursuit and investigation of these topics was in 1975 when he produced and wrote a documentary record album called UFOs: The Credibility Factor for CBS. It marked the first time that military and scientific voices came together to disclose their personal UFO encounters and to call for government recognition of the phenomenon. In 1978, another key attempt at UFO disclosure, but this time was on the world stage. Lee became the only person in history to produce a major presentation on UFOs at the United Nations. Under the sponsorship of Grenada, he brought together leading military and scientific experts who urged world leaders to establish an international UFO study panel. Between 1978 and 1986, Lee produced, wrote, and hosted NBC's UFO Reports, Unexplained Phenomena, and The Edge of Reality, nearly 1,500 local and national programs spanning 8 years. 1978 was also important for Lee as he became one of the first media personalities through his NBC radio features to bring public awareness to the now legendary 1947 Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash. Through the efforts of nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, Lee produced a week-long series of radio reports, featured exclusive interviews with military personnel who were directly involved with the initial Roswell cover-up. Within the same time period as his NBC experience, Lee was also a featured writer for Omni magazine. I used to love that magazine, including several cover stories about UFOs and cryptozoology. In 1993, he produced and wrote Lincoln's Music in America, the Classics in Space, a national award-winning classical musical special focusing on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Between 2007 and 2009, while on staff at abcnews.com, Lee wrote feature stories about Roswell, UFO legend, looking for life in meteorites, and the controversial practice of firewalking. Since 2010, Lee has written hundreds and hundreds of stories covering unexplained phenomena and UFOs for the AOL Huffington Post Media Group in New York City. I know I read that bio, and there is so much more to this gentleman, but again, talk about ufology for a long time and fringy stuff. Without any further delay, let's get him on the phone. Lee, good evening, and welcome to Fringe Radio, my friend.
And you did that in one breath.
I know, and only one drink, too.
It's like one take. You were good. You were very good. Well, thank you, Pat, for having me here. And, you know, I'm glad you said you used to like Omni. I loved working on Omni magazine.
Oh, I did. I did.
It was just amazing because the three things came together at the same time for me. Getting hired by NBC, because they found out I was putting this United Nations presentation together, so doing the UN presentation, and then at the same time, Omni, that had just become a new magazine in 1978, asked me if I wanted to come on and do write about UFOs, and would I like to write for my first story something about the UN event. And they turned it into a cover story. It was like, my God, please, somebody pinch me. Is all this stuff happening to me? It's great.
Well, you know, Lee, when anybody looks up your name and the amount of stuff that you've covered for such a long time, it spans over many, many, many decades. What got you kind of started, if you will? What got you started in the whole thing? Was it just interest at a very young age?
Well, you know, I have a feeling, since you remember Omni, that you and I might be close in age, but we don't want to give that away. I grew up in the 50s, and I was a product of all of those wonderful 1950 black and white, early color movies that scared the hell out of all of us. You know, Invaders from Mars, Forbidden Planet, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I mean, oh my God! I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares. And as much as they gave me nightmares, I couldn't get away from it. I didn't know at all that there might be anything to this. I was just being frightened as a kid.
Right.
had no other meaning to me. You know, it's not like I stepped into this life from a previous lifetime and knew that I was going to be tracking down aliens and UFOs.
Well, in Omni it was a great magazine. It was really way ahead of its time when you think about it. I mean, it covered controversial subjects.
It did, and it was widely considered as what they called a consumer science magazine. For your listeners who might not remember it, or even those of them who do recall Omni, many people might not remember that the owner was the very controversial Bob Guccione of Penthouse magazine fame.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he started Omni, and then a few years into it, he then gave the reins of the complete magazine over to his wife, Kathy Keaton, and she just took over the magazine. And I loved the editorial staff, and I loved the direction. I think it was a very slick-looking magazine. It had great controversial, provocative covers and stories, and it seemed like at the time that many top scientific brains wanted to write for Omni, and I was certainly not anywhere in their category or in their class, but I was just amazed and honored that they wanted me to write things. And among the things that I did write, which was something totally close to my heart, I did a feature piece on the search for living dinosaurs. And people laugh at me and have been laughing at me about that topic for decades now. And I don't care. Go ahead and laugh. I actually do believe there might be some places on Earth where prehistoric animals still live. And I hear the laughter. Here it comes. I can't prove it, but I, along the way, met many scientists who actually felt that circumstantial, anecdotal evidence coming out of a 40,000 square mile area of Congo could be a place where something could still be alive there that never went extinct because the vegetation, the environment there hasn't really changed much in 60 million years.
Exactly. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Lee Spiegel. Again, Lee, thank you so much for giving us some time this evening.
Well, I love being on Fringe Radio. I love the music. Boy, it puts you right in the mood for weird stuff.
Yeah, and we are weird. No.
Well, welcome to my world.
So we were talking a little bit, before the break, we were talking a little bit about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And swamps and stuff.
I had met some scientists who had started an organization in the 1970s called the International Society of Cryptozoology. And basically, they had come together. They were scientists of many disciplines, and they were very interested in uncovering the truth behind things like the Loch Ness Monster, dinosaurs possibly living in Africa, gigantic squid, a variety of creatures that were legend, but nobody really knew for sure if they still existed. And these scientists did something that was really interesting, and that's what made Omni want me to write a piece about them, is they took 2 different trips to Congo in Africa, once during a rainy season and then during the dry season. Very, very dangerous area to go into, even when you have permission to go there by the Congolese government. It's very tough. Imagine a swamp of mega proportions that's so difficult that even your canoes can't get through, and you have to carry them many distances while you're walking through snake-infested, mosquito-infested areas. They told me that the mosquito bite rate is something like 1,000 per hour. Whoa! And yet, these guys were going in there because they had heard stories that had come out of Africa through missionary sources that basically said that different pygmy tribes that lived in this area, and the pygmy villages were so far apart that they didn't have contact with each other. There were no telephones there, no modern communication equipment, and that the pygmies had been talking about large, strange animals that they had experienced and encountered in the Congo.
Right.
And so the scientists wanted to know, well, what's going on here? And so what they did was they went to Congo and they devised an interesting experiment. They created flashcards, the kind that you teach school children with. And on many of the cards, they had, like on one card, there'd be a picture of an elephant or a picture of a tiger, a picture of a bird, and they had pictures of animals that we know are indigenous to the area. And on some of the other cards, they had drawings, illustrations of dinosaurs. Very simple technique. They went to these villages, and every time they would show some of the indigenous cards, the pygmies would say, "Oh yes, we've seen that, or we haven't seen that, we've seen that." And every time a scientist showed a drawing of a brontosaurus, and what the old brontosaurus was, large animal, body like an elephant, long tail, and very long, elongated neck. Okay, with almost snake-like and walking on four legs. We've all seen pictures and skeletons of brontosaurus. Whenever they showed the flashcard of the brontosaurus, the pygmies would say, "Oh yes, that's Mokele Mbembe. We see him all the time." Another village would say, "Oh yes, that's Niamala. We know Niamala. We live with Niamala." and the creatures were always described the same way, described as vegetarians. And in one case, one story that the villagers told the scientists was that one of the Mokele Mbembe creatures had wandered into their village and had killed a couple of the pygmies. And so the pygmies retaliated and killed the creature and figured that they'd hit the jackpot with food. And all of the natives who had eaten any of the meat of the animal all died. And so it freaked them all out, and so they cut the animal up, and they buried it in different places just to get rid of its body and basically get rid of the evidence. So it's not like a scientist went in there and could bring it back alive, but the fact that the pygmies had recognized it from a picture when they shouldn't have recognized it said a lot to the scientists, and that's why I put this story together, just to let people know that, we've got to keep an open mind on things like that.
Right, exactly. Well, all this stuff, Lee, and I'd like to kind of touch base on quite a few things. You started reporting, you started coming forth with the ufology stuff way back when it wasn't cool, and it's changed so much over the years. How is it perceived as a you were moving stuff into mainstream media back then? How was it perceived and accepted?
There was more ridicule, a much bigger ridicule factor back in the 1970s. Also, there were more individual research organizations. Like right now, the largest civilian research group is called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and they have branches all over the world where they have investigators who go out and they look into local reports and try and come up with as much evidence or information so it can all be then looked at and completed and then put out on their website for all to see. Back in the 70s, there were a number of organizations. There was MUFON was back there. There was NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. There was a thing called APRO, which was the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. There was the Center for UFO Studies, QFOS. And one of the problems, the biggest problem of having so many groups like that is there was always a sense of jealousy between them. Oh, I can't share with you the pictures or the films that I have from this case because we have exclusive rights to it, and so you can't have it. We don't want to play with you in this sandbox. This is our stuff. Oh, but by the way, could we have the pictures that you have of the other case from blah, blah, blah? And there was always bickering going on among these organizations. It was amazing. And what's happened now, Pat, is over the decades, I've seen that as many of these organizations have dropped out of sight and aren't there anymore, now the bickering continues between individuals. There's a whole slew, a whole community of UFO experts, researchers, who are writing books, who are working on documentaries, who are on reality TV shows, and there are currently maybe 3 or 4 ongoing mega email threads. And I only know about this because I'm one of the addresses on these email threads, and I cannot believe how there's so much petty stuff going on between people who think they know what's happening with UFOs. They think they know more of what the real answers are or the truth about UFOs. And going back years, well, there are those documents from the 1950s, and I know what they really mean, and how can you prove that? And I'm saying, I've tried to say to all of them, enough. Yeah. That's not what this is all about. We're all missing the point about the whole UFO issue completely. And many of these people don't like it when I say that, because then they say, well, who the hell does Spiegel think he is, sitting on his, high and almighty throne? No, I'm nobody. I'm just somebody who likes to keep it simple. There is something going on around this planet. There's a lot of evidence to that. There's a lot of testimony from the government. There are documents. There are eyewitness accounts from military jet pilots, from commercial jet pilots, who describe things that represent some kind of technology that we don't have. There's the issue. What is this thing that continues to show itself all around the planet and shows itself whenever it wants to? We don't have any control over it. It appears and disappears when it wants. It obviously knows people are looking at it and taking pictures and videos. My one of my nephews asked me a couple of years ago. He said, Uncle Lee, why is it that UFOs need to have lights? I said, that's a great question. Like exactly. What do they need lights for?
Yeah, if they're that advanced, I've asked that myself many times.
It's like we need lights because when you have lights and we're driving around at night, there'd be a lot of accidents every day, every moment of every day. We need lights for our own safety reasons as well as other things. But why do the UFOs, if they have a much more sophisticated, advanced technology than we do, you'd think that their technology, even if they're from different places, you'd think that they'd be able to kind of be aware of each other and kind of steer away from each other as they're flying around. But yeah, why do they need lights? And the simplest answer is, it's for our benefit. They want to be seen.
Right.
I like to keep this kind of stuff simple. I don't care anymore about all the documents that go back to the 50s. Although a lot of those documents are very telling and very specific. The many times that American and international jet fighter pilots have been scrambled to go chase these things and couldn't get near them at all, and that they represent some kind of mode of operation that we're not familiar with. Those are the questions that really we need to stay with. What are these things? Do we have any possible hope of even knowing where they come from? And again, I'm one of those people who says, I don't care where they come from. I'm only interested in the fact that someone is here. Someone is visiting us, and they're letting their presence be known to us. That's all they're doing. Whatever their agenda is, they're not giving us a clue about it. And I think that's the kind of thing that, to me, it's important. All this other stuff that's going on about people bickering and writing books, and come on, folks, it's like my friend Colonel John Alexander, former Army colonel, had a top-secret security clearance. Actually tried for a while he was working in and around the White House years ago. He put a panel of scientists and military people together, and their sole purpose was to try and actually come up with evidence that there's a real government cover-up about UFOs.
Right.
And people hate it when John goes on stage and gives a presentation and says, folks, we didn't find any evidence of any cover-up. And people start yelling at him, what do you mean? Of course there's a cover-up. You didn't look in the right place. You didn't have a high enough security clearance. What's wrong with you? Of course there's a cover-up.
Exactly.
But,
you want to take a couple calls, Lee?
Oh, yeah, do it.
All right, let's take a couple. We got a couple stacking up. Caller, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk. You're on with Lee Spiegel.
Hey, pal, it's Horace. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. I was thinking about the lights so we don't hit them.
Yeah.
15s, 16s, 18s, they're up there checking it out, and you got to have some light on so you don't smash into a building.
Well, you'd figure that they, if whatever they are or whoever they are, if they have the intelligence to have a craft of that caliber, they probably can avoid things. But I'm kind of tending to believe. I've asked that question many times. I don't know what they need lights for, other than us to see them. I would assume.
That'd be my guess, and I'm sure they can see, or they use all spectrums. So.
Well,
anyway,
the other question, the other part of that equation is we have in towers and in jet aircraft, we have things called radar screens, and part of the function of a radar screen is to alert the pilots to things that are coming up, so they can avoid, like you said, bumping into something. So we already have that kind of technology that helps us to swerve around something. Take anybody who might have a technology that could be, 300, 400 years ahead of us. Imagine what we will have in 300 years that can allow us to be undetected or to avoid hitting each other. So I like to keep trying to project those kinds of possibilities.
So they want to be seen.
Oh, I think so, because you go back historically, not just centuries, but eons, when UFOs or weird things in the skies were being reported by people who were drawing them on cave walls or around the planet.
That was something else. That was why I was going to call. Then I thought, no, I called K-Talk too much. Geez. But the skeletons and the clothes that are down South America, the huge skeletons, the cliff carvings. Blue parts.
What a new part is an out-of-place artifact.
Yeah.
In time.
Yeah.
Good Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
And then in like 1930, 40, 50, all of a sudden our electronics went from tubes to crazy. And I don't know, man. I'm not.
Well, what you're getting closer to is the theory that many people like is that at some point, like after around 1947, after a little incident at Roswell, New Mexico, people started thinking, well, maybe we somehow figured out how some of these UFOs work, and have figured out some of that technology for ourselves. But I have a problem with that.
Well, me neither. And then you try to bring in Neil Freer, Zach Sitchin, and then,
Hey, can I get you guys to hold through the break for a little bit?
I'll hang around.
All right, Harv, hang in there. You're listening to Fringe Radio.
Sounds fun.
Me too. We'll be right back with Lee Spiegel and Harv. Hang in there. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest, Lee Spiegel, is on the line. Harv has been patiently waiting on hold through the commercials. So, Harv, you were talking about Stitchin right before we went into the break.
Well, yeah, everything he brought up, and I've heard people try to put him down. I just think his research was so replete with facts. Although I talked to him with at Salt Lake, you guys put a thing on down there, and it was like, he didn't know everything. Who does? But there's so many things going on that you can't discount it just because you don't know the answer.
Very true. What you think, Lee?
Exactly. We just don't understand everything. One of my closest friends in this whole UFO community and maybe you've had him on your show, Pat, is nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman.
Oh, several times.
Yeah, Stan is, in fact, Stan was the first scientist I ever interviewed. He was the first anybody who I ever interviewed in the whole subject of UFOs, and that was back in 1975 when he and I met. This is 40 years ago. And he said things to me in that interview that he continues to say all these decades later in every presentation that he does. And I love to throw these quotes out to people. The first quote he says is, when somebody says that bit of UFO behavior is impossible, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to do that, and if I don't know how to do it, well, it must be impossible. You know?
Right.
Nicely done.
You know, and then another phrase that he comes out with is, it's like what we call the code of the debunker. Debunkers have their own credo and code, and Stan says this is pretty much their code. It goes like this: don't bother me with the facts. My mind is already made up.
Exactly, I've heard that.
And you can read it the other way. You can just begin it by just saying, my mind is already made up. Don't bother me with the facts. And
you know what,
exactly.
Lee, I've done that in my own life, and constantly having to go back over things and sit and analyze it. And thank God for K-Talk and this fella here, because it's really opened my mind instead of closing down.
Well, you have a lot of people out there. For example, when you say, don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up, every time I say that, I think of pretty much all the scientists who work at the SETI Institute in California. You know, the SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They're using these radio telescopes to listen for signals from outer space. And I'm very friendly with several of the astronomers there, and in fact, I did a project once with Frank Drake, who created SETI, and I've said to them, I've asked them, I said, what about all the stories of reliable eyewitnesses from not just farmers who may or may not have seen something, although I have no problem with a farmer telling a really good, credible story either. I have no problem with that. But what about...
Farmers are close to the dirt. They know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, they know if they see something that shouldn't be there, you know?
Yes, sir.
But what about military jet fighters, commercial jet fighters?
Them fellas are highly trained. They know what's going on. That's why they don't get shot down.
It's like, why is it that commercial airline companies would prefer that their pilots not go public about things that they've seen? Well, obvious answer, they don't want the public, the flying and paying public to think that there might be a safety hazard about getting on board a craft and something that they might encounter when they're at 30,000 feet.
Furthermore, on top of that, it's got to be the government telling them because they're licensed by the government.
Yeah, so it's like the problem is, what about these kinds of reliable eyewitnesses? And time after time, scientists at SETI have said to me, well, I've heard some of the stories, but no one's ever actually presented a story that I couldn't explain, and I haven't really had the time to look into it. Haven't had the time to look into it. And the other problem that goes along with that equation is how many scientists, including the ones at SETI, including university scientists who debunk these things, you always hear time after time, well, it wouldn't be good for my funding.
Yeah,
okay.
Nicely done. Right back to the money.
You know, these people who depend on funding to continue their research, and if their funding is cut off, well, you know, they've got to find something else to do for a living.
Hey, when Kepler went out, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I want you to go ahead, Harv.
No, when Kepler went out a few years back, you know, they identified 40 billion Earth-sized planets, and I thought for a long time, wow, that was from NASA and Parsons in California, who does. Actually, I think Parsons is the one that controls NASA, but whatever. Anyway, 40 billion Earth-sized planets. And then I started thinking after a couple of weeks, I kept thinking, Earth-sized, well, Earth-sized planet, that could be like 1%.
Well, actually, the current figure is that in our galaxy, our little regular galaxy that has how many billions of suns, that 1 out of every sun that's at approximately the same age as our sun, 1 out of every 5, we already know now, has at least one Earth-sized planet. Now you take that figure, and then you can shrink it down even more and say, well, of the 1 out of 5 that are Earth-sized, how many of those are actually around their star at the same distance as Earth is around our star in a thing called the Goldilocks zone, which means we're not too close to the sun, we're not too far away.
Certain magnetics, it's a constant rule, yes.
Yeah, and so then we end up with something like maybe 40,000, and that's a very small figure, conservative figure, 40,000 possible Earth-like planets, not just Earth-sized, but Earth-like planets where the conditions could exist for life. That's a lot.
Somebody's flying faster than the speed of light. You know, this whole speed of light thing, 186, has gotten on my last nerve ever since I started reading Omni. When Homeboy brought out Omni, I thought, oh my God, I was down in St. George in oh heck. You know, the reason I found advertising in Penthouse, and not that I read it, or I mean look at it.
Understand.
I read the article. Anyway.
Yeah, so checks in the mail.
Well, I wrote those articles that you claim that you read.
Oh yeah. Well, and I probably did when I missed an issue. You know, I had to call people. It's like, you got the issue? Yeah. They wouldn't lend it to me. I had to read it at their house. You have a problem with returning books. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, so I'm thinking that Sasquatch might be one of those that you were talking about.
Well, you want to get me started on Sasquatch? That could be a whole other show.
Well, Cro-Magnon.
Yeah.
You know, just.
Well, but what you just mentioned, Harv, about this whole traveling the speed of light, that comes under the same category of what I mentioned about Stan Friedman saying, when somebody says that bit of UFO behavior is impossible, it's because I don't know how to do it. All of the scientists who say that we are not being visited by anyone coming from another star system because it's too far, the distance is too far, it would require too many fossil fuel, proponents and sources in order to get here from there. They would have to figure out how to surpass the speed of light, and that's all impossible. And I say, wait a minute, you're talking because those are limitations that we have. We don't know how to do that, so you cannot automatically turn around and say, well, somebody else can't do it either.
Lee, when my grandma was still alive, Grandma Flossie, she was born in 1899. She died in 1999. Now, my dad's on his get in his garage is 1899. But, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, she told me, I saw the first car. I saw this. I saw that. Every time I was working around her, around her area, I'd stop by for lunch. Typically, I would never leave the job for lunch because it cost you money. But if I was working around Grandma Flossie, I'd go over and she would tell me everything. She saw it all, from riding horses to cars to going to space. I remember watching this when we set on the moon on a black and white. It's crazy. Just because I don't know how they did it doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yes, thank you.
I get you, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh, thanks for all the time.
No problem, man. I've got a couple others stacked up behind you, but thanks for calling in, Harv.
All right, pal.
Okay,
Thanks,
brother.
man.
Take care.
Thanks,
Talk to you
man.
later.
Peace out.
You want to take another one, Lee?
Sure. You may have a break coming up, but let's do it.
Yeah, we've got a break coming up in about 5 minutes. So let's take another one.
Go for it.
Caller, good evening. You're on with Lee Spiegel.
Good evening, Pat. This is Bill from New York. And hello, Lee. How are you this evening?
Well, what part of New York are you in that you're probably snowed in?
Actually, I'm near Newburgh, and you actually looked at one of my videos that was posted a few months ago. It was on MUFON. I'm a sky watcher here near Newburgh, and it was a big orb-looking sphere that went across the sky. And I think you've seen that video of mine.
I think I have too. I've actually been looking at quite a few videos of orbs. Orbs seem to be like the new thing going around. I've discovered. You know, first we had flying saucers, and then we went from those to triangular-shaped UFOs. Now people are seeing and videotaping orbs.
Well, actually, Lee, you just touched with Harv earlier about, before I asked you a couple of questions, but you touched on the lights on the objects. Now, I picked up an object through my cameras that has 3 lights on it. And the object comes up from the bottom, it stops very briefly, and then it zooms off like warp speed. And that's what it literally looks like. And before it actually takes off, the lights illuminated, brightened. And I believe that some of these lights are propulsion for these craft. Now, the question...
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that's a good point. Go ahead.
Now, the question I had for you, Harv actually touched on one of them, but do you believe that recently there was an article, and the article said that life may have come here through some type of alien spore, or do you think that maybe an organism traveled by way of a meteorite and arrived here on Earth and may have had some part of the creation process here on Earth itself?
Right. That's a story I actually wrote about 10 days ago.
Yes.
And the process that you're talking about is called panspermia. And what panspermia is, scientists believe, is that it's possible that some kind of fossil organism can reach Earth and actually travel through the cosmos, like hitchhiking a ride on meteorites or on comets, and that they can find their way to the ground of a planet like Earth. But then the other thing in the story that I wrote about is something called directed panspermia, where there are scientists, in fact, the man who discovered the DNA molecule, Francis Crick, he was a Nobel Prize winner. He actually had worked on a theory that directed panspermia is that some extraterrestrial civilization has deliberately sent some kind of space seeds to Earth. Now, it's not an accident. These are not things that were put inside meteorites or in comets, that they were deliberately sent here. And it's a controversy that's still swirling around. But the fact that he said this is what stands out in my mind, because he's a real scientist. He won the Nobel Prize. He discovered DNA. Why shouldn't we pay attention to his ideas?
I agree. You know what? Maybe this was sent here purposely. Maybe they came from a dying planet, and they wanted to start another life form here on our planet. I mean, that could even be accountable for all the supposed extraterrestrials that are coming to Earth to begin with, and the hybrid process. You know, maybe they're trying to procreate and try to somehow become accustomed to our atmosphere and our living conditions in our environment.
You know, we don't want to just assume that's the only reason why this might be happening.
I totally agree.
You know, and I hate to throw this out, but, you know, there have been movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers where spores and things came to Earth, and, well, they were here to take us over. So I'm not trying to be the voice of doom, but there's always two sides to something.
I agree. I think that Hollywood is actually servicing, in a way, the whole government angle on creating fear and you know, like almost like a mass hysteria. It's also, it works in their favor to prevent disclosure from actually coming out. So I am one to believe that I don't believe that all the aliens are hostile and malevolent. I believe there is also benevolent species out there. I am not one to believe that in all these stories that they're all here to harm or to have some kind of evil intention.
Well, what do you think, Lee? You know, we've got an NBC News break coming up in just under a minute, but Hollywood sensationalism, do you think that it's helped the UFO research or the UFO knowledge base, or do you think it's harmed it?
I think only a few very intelligent movies have helped to promote a possible truth, and certainly Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Without a doubt,
is right up there.
Contact.
Right up there. Yeah, and I will say one other thing before the break, and we can continue this after. Lately, my attitudes have been changing a little bit over the last 40 years that I've been looking at this, and people are surprised when they hear me say, at this point, I don't think there's going to be UFO disclosure.
Okay.
And we can talk about that more.
Bill, do you want to hang in?
Sure.